Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see all of you here in person, and I want to say a special welcome to anyone who is joining us live online. We're so glad that you are here, and we hope you will enjoy this weekend's series of presentations. As you know, we've been covering the topic of mental health all throughout the month of October. And this weekend, we're excited to have Dr. Neal Nedley here with us, who will be introduced in a moment. And we hope that you will enjoy and benefit a lot from these presentations. If you would, please bow your heads with me and let's say an opening prayer. Father God, we just want to thank you for the way that you have worked this month. I know that the presentations that have happened so far have been such a blessing to me and to many others who have been here in person and watching online. And I ask that as we continue the presentations this weekend and look into some serious mental health topics and how they relate to your word and how you can transform our lives, I ask that you'd inspire us, be with our speaker as he presents, and help us to gain a lot from this weekend. Thank you for letting your peace be with us. In your name, amen.
We are very fortunate to have our speaker this evening. I understand that it's rather difficult to get through Sacramento and deal with SeaTac and other places in order to get here. But we are glad that you and your wife made it safely. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Neal Nedley. He's a full-time internal medicine physician in Ardmore, Oklahoma, specializing in gastroenterology, mental health, lifestyle medicine, and the difficult-to-diagnose patient. I'm curious what that will mean. Dr. Nedley is a graduate of Andrews University and the Loma Linda University School of Medicine. He completed his residency in internal medicine at Kettering Medical Center. As if being a full-time physician is not enough, he also serves as president of, let me get this lengthy name right, Weimar Center of Health and Education near Sacramento, California. That features a residential lifestyle center, an academy, a college, and all located in the beautiful Sierra foothills. Through his experience and extensive research, he created the widely used Nedley Depression Recovery Program. And Jerry Dietrich is a veteran of putting one of those on. This is a highly effective treatment for depression and anxiety. In his spare time, as if there would be any, Dr. Nedley is the author of several books, including Proof Positive: How to Reliably Combat Disease and Achieve Optimal Health Through Nutrition and Lifestyle. A second book, Depression: The Way Out, and most recently, The Lost Art of Thinking. Dr. Nedley is an instrument-rated pilot, and we're delighted that his wife Erica accompanied him, but they also have 4 boys, so none of those are here, I guess. So we are just really happy to welcome them to Port Orchard and look forward to learning from him. Dr. Nedley.
Well, thank you, Dr. Payton, for that introduction. You know, it's one of the risks of the internet these days, because that was an accurate bio a few years ago, but there are some updates on it. That long name is now shortened. It's actually Weimar University. We officially became a university. Our accreditor actually recommended we change our name since we have multiple undergraduate programs as well as graduate level programs now, including in the field of psychology. And our last aspect of Ardmore, Oklahoma was gotten rid of just this month. We actually moved from Ardmore to Northern California a few years ago, but still had a business, and we're doing quite a few things in Ardmore, Oklahoma. That's all moved to the DFW area now, and our son is actually starting a retail store in mental health. So you can actually go to a Dallas center, and everything in that retail store will have to do with improving your mental health. So there's no other store like it in the nation. So we'll see how that happens, but we do have an online aspect as well. But that's all centered in Dallas, Texas, although Eric and I live at Weimar, and I'm no longer a full-time practicing internal medicine physician because of the administration that I do at Weimar, as well as research. We've been publishing a lot in the peer-reviewed journals, and now Weimar University has our own IRB. But it's good to be with you this evening, and I've never been to Port Orchard, and so this is a real treat for us. Last few months ago in July, we went to a name that I have confused with Port Orchard called Orcas Island, and we really enjoyed it up there, but there's so much beauty around this area, and it's certainly a privilege to be here. Well, today we're going to be talking about a topic that you may not have heard, and that is a topic actually looking at suicide and suicidal thoughts among Bible characters, as well as those who wished to die and thought that they would be better off dead. And so those feelings and thoughts are not new. They're certainly more common today than they have been probably since America was founded. In the last 20 years, suicidal deaths have significantly increased, and even before COVID came about, we were seeing a significant rise in suicide and suicidal thoughts, even when the economy was booming. And normally when the economy booms, we see suicide rates go down. And when the economy crashes, we see suicide rates go up. But even when the economy was booming, we saw suicide rates go up. And they were going up to such a degree that life expectancy was actually being lowered in America before COVID came about. The 3 years before COVID came about, life expectancy went down 3 years in a row. It had not done that since World War I, 1916 to 1918. And in the middle of that was the flu pandemic, which also, of course, helped it to go down. And even before COVID came about, we saw 3 years in a row life expectancy going down, and they said it wasn't due to physical disease worsening, it was due to mental disease worsening. And those are called deaths of despair. So it was suicidal deaths and also opioid-related deaths, which are also deaths of despair that were skyrocketing, and then alcohol-induced deaths as well. And so when you added that all up, those deaths were skyrocketing and lowering our average life expectancy in this country. And of course, life expectancy has gone down even further this last year due to COVID. COVID, of course, has affected most every community in America. And I actually still do internal medicine work and ICU work. I like critical care work. I only do it 3 days a month just to keep my skills up, but unfortunately, this week I did my 3 days, and we lost 2 COVID patients in the ICU. Very sad cases when that occurs, but COVID is a killer, and despite its physical consequences, it's actually affected our mental health even more, as you'll see from the surveys. So, in fact, this is the survey I'll show you on the screen. Gallup poll did a survey, and Americans actually state COVID has adversely affected their mental health even worse than its effects physically or financially. There's many people that have been affected physically. Of course, we have long hauler COVID symptoms, so even if you survive COVID, there's a 15 to 30% chance you're going to have long-term consequences from it. And financially, it's had major effects, but despite those major effects, America says it's actually affected their mental health more. And of course, that has to do also with the response to COVID. Even before sin came into the world, Christ uttered the words, "It is not good." During creation, he kept saying, "It's good, good, very good." Came out as planned, beautiful. But even before sin came into the world, he said it's not good. What was the rest of the phrase? For man to be alone. He designed us to be social creatures. And this whole aspect of social distancing and individuals, often the elderly being, locked up in an apartment building, and even their kids and grandkids can't visit them because of the fear of COVID, has produced a significant mental health toll. And of course, we know even in prison, it's punishment enough to be in jail, but all jails know that you can get more punishment than just being in jail. And what's the most severe punishment they give a prisoner? Solitary confinement. Because of that, this is a significant issue. And many people have been solitarily confined to many respects. Although they get an idea that they're not because they can get online, and there's something called social media and those sorts of things. Those are kind of substitutes, but it's not the real deal as far as the full social interaction. Again, a quote from Gallup: "Emotional well-being is being attacked at a stronger rate than ever before in human history." And so I think it's appropriate for your community to put on some mental health weekends and emphasizing this weekend as well. In 2020, a survey came out showing that 11% of the population seriously considered taking their own life in 2020. That's a huge number and far more than it's ever been. The military just released information a couple of weeks ago showing 4 times as many people have died from suicides in the military than combat deaths since 2001. We've had a lot of combat deaths in 2001, a lot of different wars, but what has actually affected them far more are the suicidal deaths in the military. And last week, you might have heard, it was on the news, the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, closed their doors due to the high suicide rates occurring on campus. And we're seeing high suicide rates in colleges and universities that are much higher than previous before. And so I think it's appropriate for us to look at this topic. It's affecting life expectancy. It's affecting our mental well-being. And of course, if you have a relative that dies by suicide, this is something that affects the survivors all the way through their life. It's a gnawing pain in regards to that individual taking their own life. Of course, a lot of people feel guilty that survive. Like, how did I miss that they were having that type of mental crisis in their brain and didn't even know about it? And so those types of situations really gnaw on all of us. This is a recent program. We run residential programs at Weimar in depression and anxiety recovery. We see a lot of patients who are wanting to end their life. Some that actually come from the emergency room. They might have been 5 times in a psych unit, and now they've tried to end their life again, and they're being put in a psych unit again, and then a relative will tell them about our program, and so sometimes they're transferred right to Weimar University to be on a different type of approach, which is a lifestyle approach for suicidality. We take 20 in every one of our programs, and this was 9 out of the 20 were actively thinking of ending their own life. Some of them about a quarter of the time, that was 3 of them, and then 4 of them about half of the time, this was in the 2 weeks before coming to the program, they were thinking of ending their life, and 2 of them were thinking about it all the time before they came to the program. And of course, in a traditional psychiatric setting, they put these individuals away for what's in, I don't know what it's called here in Washington. I know in California it's called a 5150. And what is it called here in Washington when we commit a patient against their will to a psychiatric facility trying to end their life? I'm not hearing the name. Every state seems to have a name, but we'll find out what that name is. But we actually got that 3-day commitment. A lot of people don't realize it actually came from the Bible itself, from someone who was actively suicidal. And studies have shown that acute suicidality is not a chronic state. So if someone that wants to end their life doesn't end their life, and they're put in a place where they can't end it, and are given time to reflect, over 3 days, those feelings of wanting to imminently end their life go away, most commonly. And that's exactly what happened to Jonah, who was actually asked his fellow shipmates to assist him in his suicide. And he thought the pain of his life would be over with, but of course his life got worse at that point. And over 90% of individuals who try to end their life are not successful. They're very much like Jonah, and thinking for sure their life's going to end, but it actually doesn't end. And in the process, often it gets worse as a result of complications of trying to end their life. So Jonah had to spend 3 days and 3 nights, it's very clear in the Bible, in the belly of the whale. And that belly of the whale was smelly, it was painful. You had the acid from the stomach eroding the skin. It was a very dark environment, and he was 5150'd, we'd say. And it took him 3 days to turn his thoughts around, and at that point he cried out to the Lord, and he was vomited out on dry land, and he had another opportunity. And through lifestyle measures, exercise, light, and now following God's will, he was able to change, although later on he ended up becoming suicidal again. That's another case study in and of itself. But in a traditional psych setting, when they put them away, they might put medications on them and things like that, but they'll get counseling called a safety plan. This is where they are actually taught to consider other ways of coping besides ending their life. And so there'll be a list of things that they can go through that will be additional coping mechanisms before ending their life. And then they'll be discharged after they're no longer imminently suicidal. But far better is to get rid of the thoughts entirely. And this is just, they spend 10 days in our facility utilizing a comprehensive lifestyle approach as well as analysis of thoughts. And you can see that in 10 days, the suicidal thoughts are gone completely. In 8 out of 9 of them, 1 of them still has some, and those are ones that we normally keep for more than 10 days. They'll be there 17 days, and eventually that will tend to get a lot better. But far better to actually get rid of those thoughts through the analysis of truth and rational thinking. So our average in the program for those that are suicidal is thinking about half the time, and then the average goes down to barely thinking about it, even at all. So the first recorded case in the Bible of someone wishing death upon themselves, anyone know what case that is? Yes, the case of Job. And here's, interestingly, it is Satan that often the evil one that brings hardships into our life. When we, of course, this whole world of sin that we lived in was started by the deceptions of the devil, and all of the death and disease and all of those sorts of things that we have to endure and put up with are really a result of sin. And of course, sin would be bad enough if it just affected those who are living against the will of the Lord, but sin also affects innocent people. That's how it is even more terrible in those that have not necessarily succumbed to that. But when we start getting affected by those complications of sin, often he tempts us to actually blame God for the whole disaster to begin with. And this is something that's very common. Of course, even the insurance company uses this term when absolute crisis disasters occur. What do the insurance companies call those? Acts of God. And so God gets blamed for a lot of this. Now, God, of course, did give us a free will. So in that sense, he might be responsible. But he gave us a free will because God is a God of love. And we can't have love that's coerced. It has to be voluntary. And so since God wanted us to experience love, there is a free will, which means that we have the opportunity not to choose love and to go a different direction, and then those complications end up resulting in natural ways, not because God causes them per se. But Job didn't know why all these disasters were occurring with him. What kind of losses did Job have? Lost his children. Yeah, for individuals who've lost a child, that always seems so wrong, that a child is passing away before the parent. But he didn't just lose one child. How many did he lose? He lost all of them, actually at one time. What else did he lose? He lost all of his finances. He had a number of businesses. He's a great businessman, and he lost all of his employees. He actually loved his employees, lost all of those. And there was no insurances back then, so if you lost a business, it wasn't like, okay, well, now I can collect from the insurance, so at least I'll have something. There was no insurance there at all. And I imagine now, since we realize that the devil and God were having a dialogue over Job, and this is how Job got opened for these types of disasters, that the devil probably chose the worst employee, because one employee survived to be able to tell Job about it. And I imagine he kept the most challenging, worst employee, and all of his good ones passed away as one after another of his businesses failed. And then after losing all that, what else did he lose? He lost his health. And not only did he lose his health, it was painful. He had chronic pain, and whenever he moved, the pain was even worse. And so you might understand why he is saying, "Let the day perish wherein I was born." Oh, that I might have my request, he states, that I might die, and that God would grant me the thing that I long for. Job was faithful. He wasn't going to take his own life, but he certainly wished that he would fall asleep and never wake up. He even got to the point, even if it would please God to destroy me. And so this is what he was pleading for, and that he would loose his hand and cut me off. So he went on to say, "My soul chooses death rather than life, and I loathe my own life." And he says, I don't want to live forever. Some people want to live a long time. Not me. Let me alone, for my days are vanity. This all seems to be a waste. And so if you've ever had thoughts anywhere close to this, you can certainly identify with Job. And as we say, many Americans have identified with those thoughts, particularly when a lot of bad things start occurring in our life and we start suffering to a large degree. But then he went on to say, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And so, like many, he did not give up his faith in God despite the disasters. In fact, he said, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. And in the midst of this disaster, he also said, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and though skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God. And so his faith and trust and confidence in God stayed there despite the bad that occurred, even though he didn't understand that bad. And of course, we think it's bad enough that he suffered all these things, but then his so-called friends came and told him that he was suffering because he was a really bad guy and he was not fessing up as to how bad he was. And so, he had to endure that from those that were close. And he also had to endure, where in the dialogue, it's clear that the devil could have also taken his wife away from him. But the devil kept her around. And what did she tell him to do? Yeah, there was a reason why he kept her around. He knew she wouldn't be able to handle this emotionally. And so she just told him, you need to curse God and die. Why are you still having confidence in your Creator and your Redeemer? It turns out another individual that we often don't think that wanted his life to go away and to be abolished was Moses. Moses was a leader of Israel. He was a very meek and humble follower of the Lord. And even before his character was more purified, he still was willing to live a life of misery and poverty rather than be the Pharaoh of Egypt to rescue God's children. But then after he did rescue them, along with the Lord's help, and they're out there in the wilderness, quite a few bad things happened. And those people, when they couldn't know where their water was going to come from, or their food, or something else would happen, who would they end up blaming for all this? They would blame Moses. And they would even come up with things that you just wonder why there was such buy-in. They'd say, Moses is a very smart man. He actually brought us out here to become wealthy because he knew we were going to die out here and he would inherit all of our stuff. Yeah. And the people actually believed all this. And, here he is sacrificing, doing all this, and the very people he's trying to help. Talk about biting the hand that feeds you. That was the case with the children of Israel. And so when this would happen over and over again, Moses ended up saying, God, I can't take it anymore. Notice his statement. Wherefore hast thou afflicted thy servant? And wherefore have I not found favor in thy sight that thou layest the burden of all these people upon me? You're the one that asked me to lead these people. I followed your counsel. I'm leading them. But this is a hard lot. Have I conceived all these people? Have I begotten them, that thou shouldest say unto me, carry them in thy bosom? A nursing father beareth the suckling child unto the land which thou swearest unto their fathers. Wherefore should I have meat to give unto all these people, or food? For they weep unto me, saying, give us meat or food that we may eat. I'm not able to bear all these people. It's too heavy a burden for me. And then he goes on to say, if thou deal thus with me, what does he tell the Lord to do? tells the Lord to kill him, I pray thee, out of hand. If I have found favor in thy sight, then let me not see my wretchedness and get rid of me. Moses wished to die rather than lead this messy group of people. And so the Lord, in his dialogue with him, of course, this was quite a request from Moses, who's saying, this is beyond what I can take. And of course, we know after that, there was a good idea, it actually came from his father-in-law, to divide these burdens up 70 different ways. Instead of having one person take care of all of the mess, then you could divide this up and have some people learn how to do leadership. But Moses' rewards for leading the people was lack of rest and hearing all the discord and pain. He also had to put up with their peaceful demonstrations about disparities. That occurred in the camp of Moses, and they would have all of these things in regards to feeling like they weren't being equally treated or whatever. And even Aaron and Miriam started to take up that cry. And then hearing them complain about things and draw false, hurtful conclusions, like that he was out there to try to take advantage of them and all of that. So God actually, in his dialogue with them, said, Moses, you're right. They are a mess. And they know they're a mess themselves. They know that they're actually not all that good. And unfortunately, they aren't going to do what's necessary to get out of their mess. They're not going to learn to trust me completely and fully, despite all the things that I've done for them myself. And so I have a plan, Moses. I will start over with you. Instead of me getting rid of you, you're not the problem. They're the problem. Let's get rid of the problem, and then I'll start over with you. Quite an interesting dialogue. And Moses said, if you're going to do that, you need to wipe me out first. God, don't you realize you'll be irreparably misunderstood by the rest of humanity if you do that? If you have led them out there, and because they're not completely faithful and they're such a mess that you just start over with me. Don't do it. Your character will be misjudged if you do. And then he said, despite all the problems they've caused me, I love these messy people too much. And so he stood in the way, and he became a type of Christ in a way, in love and self-sacrifice, to stand in the way and say, no, I'm not going to do that. Now, I don't think God necessarily wanted to do that anyways. He was testing Moses' character and leading him closer and closer to him. But it is quite a dialogue that they had. And Moses, fortunately, was able to get relieved some from his work and ended up doing a great work for the Lord. And despite his desire to die, he did have a desire to actually live through to see the promised land himself. But he did not, as a result of his sin near the end of his life and losing his patience with that messy lot. We might all often say that this was justified, but God didn't see it that way. He knew that despite all of the challenges in life, we are still to follow his will in our life and still look to him for trust. But Moses did not stay in the grave long. I think in part due to the fact that he never complained about his discipline. He never told God that, I think this is too much. I've done all this. I should be able to see the promised land. He trusted God fully with what God was going to do. And as a result, Moses, we're told, did not stay in the grave long. And he was the first one that was resurrected and taken to heaven. But unfortunately, there are those in the Bible who actually did commit suicide. And they didn't just want to die, they actively intervened to have themselves pass away. The book of Judges tells about the first one that's recorded. This was a leader of a group in Israel that was trying to take over more cities and more lands. And there was a strong tower with the city, and all the men and women fled to that tower as he was chasing them with his army. And as they got into that tower for protection, they climbed to the top of the tower. And Abimelech, who was the head general, came under the tower, fought against it, and went hard into the door of the tower to actually burn it with fire to take over. But there was a certain woman on the top of the tower that cast a millstone upon Abimelech's head, and his skull broke, bleeding occurred, and it looked like he was going to die, and he thought he was going to die. So he hastily said unto a young man, his armor bearer, and said unto him, "Draw your sword and kill me, that men may not say of me, a woman slew me." And the young man thrust him through, and he died. Assisted suicide because he did not want to lose face. And suicidal thoughts can come about as a result of not wanting to lose face, to have shame. And because people don't want to experience that open shame, they'd often rather even take their own life than to have to experience that, as the first suicide did in the Bible. Studies have been done on shame-free guilt. Shame-free guilt means that we realize that we're responsible, but instead of feelings of shame, we go into responsibility and repair and redemption. When we have shame guilt, we tend to blame others and get defensive or go into denial. Defensiveness and denial is very much linked to shame guilt, where repenting, repair, and redemption is related to shame-free guilt, and we can end up becoming a better person. We need to realize none of us are perfect, but we can learn from our mistakes, and we can become better people by going into repenting and repair and redemption instead of just feeling these painful feelings of shame that want us to crawl under a table, or even, as Abimelech did, to end his own life. And of course, despite the fact he didn't want it known that a woman killed him, it's recorded for all time in history in the Bible that indeed a woman did. And so a lot more people than just in that local area recognize that had happened. So I'm going to skip number 2 and 3 suicides in the Bible, because we're going to talk about that and the principles behind it a little bit tomorrow for the service. But number 4 suicide was a very intelligent person, one of the most intelligent people in the Bible. And this was an individual who had been wronged. And, this is one of the things that we need to also understand. In this world of sin, all of us are going to be treated unfairly at times. And members of our own family are going to be treated unfairly. In fact, we need to be grateful for the times we are treated fairly, because we live in a messed up world. But how we deal with that unfairness is indeed important, because as a result, the typical way of dealing with abuse, being abused, or your family members being abused by someone, is to go into the pathway of bitterness. And bitterness involves 2 different pathways. You either go into anger, which is where you want to go into revenge, and it's just gnawing on you, or you turn that anger inward and it goes into depression. Neither pathway is a safe pathway to take. And in this case, this man was even doubly upset because the person who had wronged his family was actually well thought of by the vast majority of Israel. In fact, probably more well thought of than any other king in the history of Israel. So who am I speaking of that he was bitter towards? Anyone want to know who the most famous and most revered king is in Israel's history? King David. Yes. And how had David wronged his family? Does anyone know the story? It was Bathsheba. Yeah, it was the Bathsheba event, the adultery with Bathsheba, and then the letting her, or putting the husband in a situation where he would actually die, and thus he'd be able to marry Bathsheba. And one of David's wisest counselors was Ahithophel, who was a relative. And Ahithophel became very bitter over that whole situation. And you might understand it. Was it right for David to do that? Not at all. But instead of taking the path of bitterness, God actually encourages us to take the path of forgiveness. Now, a lot of people don't want to go to the path of forgiveness because they think if I forgive, that means what they did was okay. Or I'm just telling them, oh, forget about it. No, forgiveness is not that. We don't forgive people for things that are okay. We don't forgive people for things that should just be forgotten. The fact that we are forgiving them tells them that what they did is wrong. And it actually needs to be remembered as being wrong so that individuals don't repeat the wrong and that individual doesn't repeat it itself. Forgiveness doesn't mean that there aren't any consequences for the person who did wrong. There still may be civil and other consequences that have to be paid. Debts have to be paid. But what it's doing is actually turning that hurt over to God and saying, God, I trust that you are bigger than all of the wrong and harm that came from what they did. And so as we put it in God's hands, God says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. As we turn it over to God, their problem no longer is your problem. And so don't allow others to take away your joy by having that bitterness aspect towards them. Ahithophel did not go to the path of forgiveness. Even God himself eventually forgave David. And if God forgave David, he should have been willing to forgive him as well. But because he had such a revengeful anger and bitter spirit over what David did, when David started to lose his kingdom, which was actually a natural consequence from what he had done, because he was not the same king post-Bathsheba as he was pre-Bathsheba. And so the popularity of Absalom started to raise up. And so pretty soon, in order to save the nation in a civil war, David voluntarily left as Absalom came in. And Ahithophel saw this as his opportunity. Now I can get back at David, because if Absalom follows my advice, it's assured David is wiped out and revenge will finally be mine. And so he instructed Absalom on what to do, which was a very intelligent thing. Ahithophel was wise and he understood strategy, but David had sent Hushai, another intelligent person, to give Absalom wrong advice. And Hushai appealed to Absalom's self-centeredness in his counsel, and Ahithophel's counsel was neglected by Absalom for Hushai. And Ahithophel knew right away what was going to happen. He knew that if Hushai's counsel was happened, David's victory was assured, and his counsel was already public in regards to what he would have done. And so the Bible says this: when Ahithophel saw that his counsel was not followed, he saddled his donkey arose and gat him home to his house, to his city, put his household in order, and hanged himself. This was a direct result of not choosing forgiveness and allowing bitterness to grow and develop. And it's a sad end to a very wise counselor. In essence, Ahithophel was participating in a cognitive distortion called fortune telling. And so, yes, he was a wise counselor and he kind of knew how things would happen, but it's not for sure that Ahithophel would have lost his life from David. David was also very merciful. David was so merciful. In fact, this is one of the instances that we can tell that David truly had repented. There are some people that repent after these things because they've been discovered, but you can kind of tell whether it's a true repentance or not a true repentance. And when David was actually leaving his throne, there's a guy out there accusing him of all the stuff he did with Bathsheba and saying, yep, you deserve all of this, David. You did this, you did that. And then he starts also going too far and saying he did other things. And you were against Saul, and you tried to kill his people, and he starts going through all of this, and he's yelling this to a whole mass of people, just totally criticizing David in ways that were over the top. And the people closest to him said, this is way over the top. Let's go over there and we'll silence him and we'll take him out right now. Just say the word, David. And David said, you leave that guy alone. He said, I deserve everything that he's saying. I am a sinner. I deserve it all. And you leave that guy alone. Someone who hadn't truly repented would say, hey, I've already asked God to forgive this. You're not allowed to bring that up again. You shouldn't bring that up at all and just act like that they're in a higher position and that this person is actually the real wrong one by bringing it up again. No, that's a sign of lack of true heartfelt repentance. And so David had that mercy towards a guy who was saying all sorts of manner of evil against him falsely, some of it true and some of it false. And we're told that God was never so close to David as during that time on how David treated his accusers. So David was willing to have that forgiveness for others. And so we need to recognize in this world, despite all the things that have happened, there's more unfairness coming our way. Let's choose ahead of time to take the path of forgiveness and ask God to actually give us pity for those who have done us wrong. We know that there are consequences coming their way, natural consequences from their act, and we should treat them with pity and mercy and not have what they have done to us affect our future joy. And as we give it over to God, God can bless us just as he did David. Suicide number 5. Zimri had jealousy and spite. He was actually a king, and he saw that there was a coup occurring where his kingdom was going to be taken away from him. He lived in a very beautiful palace, and that he would move down the social ladder now that a new king was going to come in and take over. And he thought in the process that he would probably end up in prison or maybe even the death penalty. And he would also witness the success of one that he was jealous of. And by the way, jealousy is one of those things that can lead us into wanting to end our own life. It's one of the pathways that gets us there, jealousy, and then end up malice and those sorts of things, kind of on the Ahithophel pathway. Jealousy actually starts out by us thinking that we haven't been acknowledged the way we should have. In other words, we think that a lot of the good that we've done has been passed over by others and unacknowledged. And so this is the pathway that starts with jealousy. Christ, this is why it's so important to be meek, as Moses was, and as Christ, even the creator of the world. We're told that he was never elated by applause because he never developed this arrogant sense of self. And if you're never elated by applause, you won't be actually discouraged by bad things that come into your life. And so Christ was not discouraged by those things. But Zimri started out with feeling like he wasn't acknowledged the way he should. Then he became very jealous of this individual, and he ended up burning the whole palace over him and died by being burned alive so his successor would not have his beautiful palace and he would not be faced with imprisonment and death. So he prevented that palace from ever being used again, and he didn't want to see him do that, and so he'd rather take his own life. This is why suicide often is a selfish act as well. And so when people don't see how their carnal desires are going to be able to be fulfilled again, they aren't really thinking of what this might do to others. And so often it's the inward focus that leads them in this direction. The last suicide named, I see I have about 9 minutes left if we're going to keep this to less than an hour, is actually in the New Testament. Judas cast down pieces of silver in the temple, and we're told he went out and he hung himself. He was, we're told, a very high IQ individual, probably had the highest IQ of all the disciples. He was also very likable. In fact, it was the disciples who campaigned Christ to ask him to be a disciple because they really liked Judas. But he was the only disciple not recruited by Jesus himself. Judas, with his high IQ, thought Christ was making a lot of mistakes. And he thought, he should do this, he should do that. This isn't very wise on how he's doing this and that. And really, he needs to make himself king, and I can be next to him. And so I'll try to set it up where he's going to have to be, do miracles on himself, and then it will backfire against the scribes and Pharisees, and then he can become king, and then I can be acknowledged for this. But in this process of planning to get some money for betraying Christ, he almost repented when his feet were being washed in humility by the Master on that Thursday night. But instead, he carried out his strategized plan to be the instigator of Christ going to the throne of Israel to enrich himself in the process. And instead, when he rejected that conviction on his heart that he should repent and tell all, we're told the devil entered Judas. And he ended up betraying his master. And then when he saw that his master was not intervening to save his own life, Christ never performed any miraculous event for the benefit of himself. It was only for the benefit of others, so he would not do this for himself. The reality of how terrible his sin came in, and he ended up throwing the money back. And the scribes and Pharisees were a little embarrassed because now it was very public that they had actually given money to one of the disciples in order to take him by night, where they could not have the popular opinion swing the other way. But the anguish of a guilty soul was overwhelming. And the one who loved his own soul and tried to win it, which was Christ, was now sentenced to death because of him. And so in that process, he couldn't live with himself or his friends anymore because it was very clear that Judas had betrayed Christ. And so he ended his own life in the least painful way available at that time, which was the death by hanging. And Christ actually witnessed the dead body of Judas on his way with the cross to Calvary. The Bible also tells of another who wanted to die prematurely. I'd like to close with this. He even asked God to take his life, but God did not do it. And this was a very faithful individual. He turned away from wanting to die eventually until those thoughts were never there, and that was Elijah. Elijah, we're told, a fugitive far from dwelling places of men, his spirits crushed by bitter disappointment. He desired never again to look upon the face of man. He actually took off running to save his life from Jezebel. And it was appropriate that he was fearful of Jezebel because she had killed all the other prophets, and now he was threatening his life. But he was discouraged. This great victory on Carmel, and Israel wasn't turning around necessarily to protect him, and so he was discouraged of the after effects of the Mount Carmel experience. And instead of waiting on the Lord to see if he should take off, he just took off and ran to save his life. And 30 days later, he's asking God to take his life. He's in a cave with no light, famished, totally fatigued. And we're told he never again desired to look upon the face of man. And notice the statement that comes from that great book, Prophets and Kings, that includes this biography of Elijah. Into the experience of all, there comes times of keen disappointment and utter discouragement, days when sorrow is the portion, and it is hard to believe that God is still the kind benefactor of his earthborn children. Days when troubles harass the soul, till death seems preferable to life. Notice that sentence at the beginning, into the experience of what? All. So if we live long enough, particularly at crisis times in our life, this is going to happen. So the 11%, we can be part of that 11% when these things occur. But notice this. It is then that many lose their hold on God and are brought into the slavery of doubt, the bondage of unbelief. Could we at such times discern with spiritual insight the meaning of God's providence is, we should see angels seeking to save us from ourselves, striving to plant our feet upon a foundation more firm than the everlasting hills, and new faith, new life would spring into being. God took Elijah, had to get him out of the cave, expose him to light, tell him to get some exercise. Angels came and fed him food. I think there was some flaxseed and omega-3 and tryptophan in that food. And then gave him cognitive behavioral therapy and told him to do 3 things that Elijah didn't want to do. But Elijah trusted God and did it. And not only did he recover from depression, he established the school of the prophets, and he was translated without seeing death. And it's kind of interesting. The ones who visited Christ on the Mount of Transfiguration during his trying life here were 2 people that wanted to die and asked God to take their life, but yet trusted God through the process and are our representatives in heaven above. And so when we have these thoughts, as I think about it, we can be like Zimri, Ahithophel, and some of those others who actually actively did take their life. Or we could be like Elijah and Moses and have thoughts where we might think that we're better off dead. But when those thoughts come into being, it's important. Many people, let me see, I think I have a slide on this that we could put it up here. I also had a slide on those willing to die to save others. And of course, this is self-sacrificing love. We have so many out there that were willing to have their life end in order for others' lives to be spared. They demonstrated self-sacrificing love and self-control and reliance on his love and grace in their life. And we're told this represents the people in the end time who are going to stay true to God. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives, how? Unto death. trusting in God, rather going down to an early grave trusting in Him than turning the other way around. But what I was going to say is when the world is caving in around us and we don't see how our selfish carnal desires will ever be able to be fulfilled again, this is when people tend to think about ending their life. But instead of ending their life, it would be far better. They're actually pretty close. They're pretty close of instead of ending their life, putting their selfish carnal desires on the altar of sacrifice and putting their trust and confidence fully in God. And so this is what I would encourage you to go, the path of Moses, the path of Elijah, where instead of actually intervening in their own experience and taking their own life, they decided they were going to put all their carnal desires on the altar of sacrifice and trust fully in God. So instead, choose to die to our selfish carnal desires and give up our own will and way and say, as Christ did, not my will, but thy will be done. And God will bless, just as he blessed Moses, just as he blessed Elijah, and many others who are willing to put their all on the altar. This process will draw us far closer to him, and we will be more firmly entrenched in his will. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide. And when these crises hit in our life, this hymn is a good one to remember. So we'll close by reading the poetry that's in your hymnal. By the way, hymnals are not used a lot anymore, and they really should be resurrected because the hymns are actually some of the greatest Christian poetry put to music. And this is one of those great poems. Once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth and falsehood, for the good or evil side. Some great cause, some great decision, offering each the bloom or blight, and the choice goes by forever twixt that darkness and that light. Then decide what truth is noble when we share her wretched crust. Ere her cause bring fame and profit, and 'tis prosperous to be just. Then it is the brave man chooses, while the coward stands aside, till the multitude make virtue of the faith they had denied. By the light of burning martyrs, Christ, thy bleeding feet we track, toiling up new Calvaries ever with the cross that turns not back. New occasions teach, new duties, ancient values test our youth. They must upward still and onward, who would keep abreast of truth. Though the cause of evil prosper, yet the truth alone is strong. Though her portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. I don't know if there's someone scheduled to close. Thank you, Pastor Natalie.
Let's say a closing prayer together. Dear God, we want to enter into Sabbath rest this weekend with these words ringing in our mind. And I ask that as we reflect on what we've learned tonight and what we have heard, I ask that you bring peace to our hearts. And for anyone who may be experiencing depressive thoughts or may have considered suicide in the past or may be struggling with that in the present, I ask that you would encourage them to reach out and to seek help and help them to know that they are loved and that you can bring them to a better, happier future. Thank you for that grace that you give and the forgiveness and peace that you give to us. In your name, amen. We are so thankful that you each joined us tonight here in person and all of you online as well. My few announcements for you are to remember to join us tomorrow. We've got 3 more presentations at 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. right here in our church sanctuary, as well as online. And then tomorrow evening at 6:30 p.m., we will have our final presentation of this weekend. So we hope you join us. And for any of you wondering online, we are providing free childcare. So if you want to bring your kiddos, you can. We've got plenty of crafts for them to do that they will enjoy. If you're seeking to know more and learn more about God, and maybe this is your first time watching this kind of a presentation, feel free to reach out. You can send me an email at pastornatalie@posda.org. We'll have that for you in the link so you can see what that is. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like more information, and we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a good evening.